We often use in early child development or in neuroscience that neurons that fire together, wire together. And what that means is that we're building deep automaticity. And so if you see your 16, 18, 20-month-old and they're having some of these symptoms, then we could think of it as righting the ship early on is going to take less effort, less work. And we don't just wait and see. Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started. This week, let's delve into the topic that's near and dear to every new mom's heart. It's about the unending worries that you hold regarding your baby's health and well-being. According to a recent survey, mothers spend a staggering 1,400 hours of their baby's first year consumed with concern and worry about your little one's health and well-being. That's over 8 weeks dedicated solely to fretting or worrying. So throughout this first intense year, if you haven't already experienced it or you're in the middle of it, the average mom, that's you, will conduct around 330 Google searches seeking reassurance and guidance on various aspects of your baby's health and your parenting skills. But here's the catcher. It doesn't end there. The survey also uncovered that you, new mama, make an average of 337 calls or texts to your own mother to discuss different symptoms or seeking advice just from everyday experiences. So you're probably wondering, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not alone. Maybe I'm not crazy, right? Let's talk about what some of those worries, those common, typical, expecting worries. You worry about sleep patterns, firstly. Then you look at developmental milestones. And the third big worry is dietary concerns. So believe me, I get it. There's a plethora of anxiety going around in those first 12, 14, 16 months. And they're all weighing you down. I know that. I feel it. And in my practice, I used to see it day after day after day. In today's episode, I am going to be incredibly direct with you because at the end of the day, I want you to be able to stand up, embrace your parenthood, and acknowledge your uncertainty. Really face it. Go toe-to-toe like I talked about it in the last episode. It's okay and expected to feel ignorant. Of course, you're going to do searches. Of course, you're going to reach out to your mom. That's what we're supposed to do. Even when I became a mom and I was almost 40, with 13, 14 years of private practice, specializing in early child development, I had all of that in my pocket. And yet, that first year was hell. It was overwhelming. And a lot of it for me was I never felt so vulnerable because after caring for this baby in my womb, as you have for 9 months, and then all of a sudden, she or he is really dependent on us to quote unquote do the right thing. And the truth is, I had a slew of mentors. I had friends who had already done it way before me. So I'm reaching out and saying hi to my best friend, Cindy. You know me. You love me. Thank you for those first couple of years of guidance. I had colleagues who actually worked right in my private practice with me. Susan, the wonderful occupational therapist, and the two child psychologists that I worked with for umpteen years, Kurt and Robin. I even had a developmental optometrist in my back pocket. Thank you, John. So my point here is, yes, it is natural, and I think it's healthy to reach out and look. But the problem is, I'm sure you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information that you get. So you do your Google searches, you ask your mom who, raised kids 30 plus years ago. The world is a little bit different. Expectations are a little bit different, even though our babies and toddlers and children haven't technically changed. But my point here is I don't want you to ever be afraid to ask questions or to seek guidance. I want you to be able to be open to brainstorming the possibilities. And if you disagree, then go out and seek a second opinion. I've shared that over and over again, one-to-one in my private setting. Like, if you don't agree with me, fine, go get another opinion. And quite often, I would be that second opinion after they talk with a doctor or a developmental pediatrician, and we'll talk about what those are. But I think it's really, really prudent and vigilant to do that, and in your parental right. Before I go on, I need to make a disclaimer here because I think it's really important that we're all on the same page. Please note that the material and the opinions that I share on this channel is just for informational purposes only and is general in nature. And I'm giving you my personal experience, my professional experience, but I'm just one person, right? And I'm encouraging you to go out and seek your own research, not sit back and just wait and see, but to take what I'm sharing with you and then explore it to the next level. So whatever I share on here, it's not intended, nor should it be relied upon or construed as medical advice. And so if you do have specific questions about the health or well-being for you or your child, please pick up the phone and call your own personal healthcare provider or a state agency. Now, with that disclaimer, we are going to talk about what the pediatrician's role is and how you can work together to really support and benefit your child, right? And so I just need to make sure that we all understand that I'm not giving you quote unquote medical advice. I'm giving you my personal experience and what I've learned in my 35 years of practice. So I will outline what pediatricians are, what their role is, and what they can do for you. And I think sometimes families, mostly moms, because we're kind of leading the charge in those first 3, 4, 8 years, but it's important to understand what a pediatrician's role is and is not. So pediatricians are encouraged, and that's just encouraged, not mandated, not forced or any of that, to screen your toddler using a standardized screening form, both at 18 months and 24 months for autism. And although today we're going to talk about this one specific tool that most of the pediatricians have at their disposal, now whether they use them or not, that's part of this discussion. But typically they will administer this at your 18 and 24 month well baby checkup. Now, it is designed to be administered from a 16-month-old all the way up to 30 month. So they can give this at any time. It doesn't have to be on their 18-month marker or their 24th or 2-year-old birthday. And it is questioning the risks of autism, but many of these symptoms or questions will also be applicable to other developmental issues. So keep that in mind as we walk through this. Now, there are 3 or 4 different types of screeners that your pediatrician could choose from. The vast majority of practices will use a tool called the MCHAT-R, and then there's a slash after it, F. And it stands for, the M stands for modified, and then the CHAT stands for checklist for autism in toddlers. The R means revised. It's a revised version. And then there's a follow-up to it. So all of those titles is very, very important. I'm going to explain what all of that means to you and how you can use it more purposefully at your pediatrics office. So the MCHAT was first introduced or developed around 2009, I believe, and it was revised in 2012 and then computerized. So when it first came out, it was just paper form, and very few pediatricians really followed up on it. Sometimes the front office staff or a nurse would implement it, but it would often get lost in the shuffle. But now it's all computerized, so pediatricians are expected to do this, and yet you'll be surprised at how many don't. What it basically is, if you haven't already experienced it, or if you have and you have some questions, I hope to answer those. So it's a 20 questions, yes, no questions for the parents. Mostly the moms fill it out, and it needs to be done there in the office on the computer because you can get immediate scoring. And that's key here because, one, it takes any interpretation off the doctor's shoulders, right? He or she can simply say, okay, here's what the outcome stipulates. What's the next step? Now, do keep in mind that a screening is just that. It's just a baseline measure. It's not a full evaluation. It doesn't diagnose. It's really designed to get a baseline. And ideally, what I've always thought it should be used for is to start that conversation with you, to open up that door and really talk about early child development and what these milestones mean. But the problem is, pediatricians are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I'll explain what that means. The goal behind it back in, the early 2000s when it was first developed and researched and then became widely used, there was a high level of what we call false positives. And so that's why they revised it back in 2012, and it became better, right? The validity and the reliability is better now. But the goal is to really help the pediatrician assess with the mother or the primary caretaker, right? Dad, where your child is early on, to look at that 16, 18, 20-month-old child and say, there are really subtle nuances that could help us determine if they're on track or not. And the idea is to catch a child or to be able to identify them at a much earlier age, because then we could intervene or be much more purposeful with all of our supports. Right? And it's not to say that a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old child couldn't or would benefit less from therapies. It's just we know that working with a 16-month or an 18-month, a 20-month-old, they've had less life experience. And so a lot of the neuro pathways aren't really solidified. They haven't, and I've shared with you a phrase that we often use in early child development or in neuroscience, that neurons that fire together wire together. And what that means is that we're building deep automaticity. And so if you see your 16, 18, 20-month-old and they're having some of these symptoms, then we could think of it as righting the ship early on is going to take less effort, less work, and we don't just wait and see. The idea is to catch them earlier and to not let a lot of these subtle kids fall through the cracks or become overlooked. And we can always go back to the big discussion, why are the numbers so exorbitant? Again, I have my philosophies and my professional experience. I've also done some deep dives and talked to a lot of people, and that's for another entire different episode. Today is to explain to you what this MChat is and how you all can really use it purposefully with great success. And so I tell you this because, unfortunately, the truth is that most pediatricians, or at least the ones that I've worked side by side with, and that's 20 plus years in California, another 15 years in Vermont, they are very uncomfortable talking about development. And I'll tell you why, or at least my impression. I think primarily, they feel like they're undereducated. And it's true. They have perhaps a couple of chapters or a couple of lectures on overall development and what the developmental milestones are on that checklist. They also feel incredibly crunched for time. And you know this, and I know this. One, they have a lot of sick kids, or they just have a high back-to-back patient count because that's how our system works these days. You know, physicians get about 15 minutes tops from beginning to end with any patient. And truthfully, I think pediatricians are of the mindset that they want you to lead that question or to lead the charge. Because what do they often say? They say, well, do you have any concerns? And that's just this kind of open-ended. But you, as a new mom, a new parent, you're overwhelmed. You're spending 1,400 hours that first year, which I think is equivalent to 8 weeks of your first baby's year on this planet Earth, questioning and doubting. And you're going to this pediatrician hoping that they'll give you guidance. And they kind of put the ball back in your court. And it's a hard predicament. So they know that spending just a few minutes, and literally, like I said, 10 to 15 minutes with you and your little one doesn't really put them in a comfortable position. It's not relaxing. It's not like, let's get down and play. A lot of them will have decent bedside manners because they must like children. They went into pediatrics. But I think you're experienced enough to know that the conditions for that visit can be stressful because you're only in the office for one of two reasons. One, it's a well baby checkup, which means there are shots just right around the corner, which makes you nervous, makes the whole energy in the room nervous. The baby picks up on that, right? So you certainly can't talk to them about developmental milestones after the shots. And they only really have a few minutes and they have to get some very specific tasks done in that window. Or you're there because your baby's sick. And so that's another stressful situation. Again, not a lot of time to spend and, quote, get to know each other. So I think, one, they feel like they don't have a full understanding of the intricacies of these developmental milestones, and they're pressed for time, right? And they figure, if mom is worried, she'll ask me, right? So now, with all of that in mind, let's take a deeper look into what the MChat is. And like I said, pediatricians are encouraged to use this formal screener. They all don't, but it would be incredibly helpful if they did at the 18 and the 24-month checkup and sat down with you and discussed what the results were. We know that kids are still being missed. We also know that only about 73% of the pediatricians report that they use this screener on a regular basis. And of those 73%, only 31% share the results with you. the parent, the one who has to take the baby home and continue his growth and development. And so it was my organization, American Speech and Hearing Association, that did this study back in 2019 because we realized that even with the computerized version of the MChat, the parents weren't being informed of what the results meant, good, bad, or indifferent. And yes, it's just a screening. It's not a diagnosis, but it's an important piece of information that can really help you, the family, guide the next step. And so we're still kind of scratching our heads with why don't pediatricians use this properly? And with that, I just want to give you an example. I want to read and share an email with you that I received a couple of months ago with a new mom regarding this MChat. She says, I normally get an 8 or 11, depending on how hard I'm grading my 20-month-old son. Either way, it's always high risk. Our pediatrician tells us not to worry yet, that all children learn at their own pace. But my husband and I both worry that our son seems so far behind. He doesn't speak in single words or even babble. He doesn't wave, he doesn't point, he doesn't do imaginative play, and he hardly ever responds to his name and does not follow simple directions. On the positive side, he has a great temperament, he never throws a fit, he makes good eye contact and seems to eat whatever I serve him, and he does enjoy playing with his cars. And she continues with, I don't want to make a problem where there is none, but I also know that early intervention can really help. I'm hoping to get some direction and that you could give me that. I'm also curious if other moms have similar experiences. What do they do with their score? Maybe I'm just overreacting. So I'd like to say that I was able to walk through what the scores meant with this mom. She was not overreacting. And the truth is, I initially didn't understand when she said, well, I usually get an 11 or above. And I'm like, how many times has the pediatrician given you this with no support? And with that, I want to explain to you all, you moms out there, what the scores really mean and what the pediatrician should be doing. Now, I get that they haven't had a lot of training, that it's just a tutorial online. And because they don't have a lot of educational experience or even clinical experience on child development, then this tool is actually designed to give them the script to help guide you to the next best step. So here it is. There are 20 questions, like I said, yes, no questions. And then you get an automatic score. If you score 0, 1, or 2, you're at low risk for falling in the autism spectrum. If your child's score is 3 to 7, you're at medium risk, and that we need to take a closer look ASAP. If your child scores 7 or above, right, we have 7 to 20, then you're at high risk and you need to do something immediately. But here's the catch, that this particular screener has a part 2. And we're going to go through, I'm going to share with you what those 20 questions are, just so you know, if you haven't done it already. I'm going to give you a little insight of what they're really targeting. Say you get a 10, like this mom, and you fall into the high risk. Part 2 should be administered right then and there, because everything is done on the computer and is immediate, right? Because the F part of this title of the screener, the MChat R, which means revised, and then there's a /F on it, means to follow up. So the pediatrician needs to ask follow-up questions right away. And the questions are right there on the computer. So say, for example, you missed question number 5, he would pull up question number 5 and probe to extract more specific information with you. Again, it should be a dialogue. And then he determined whether you pass or fail again, right? Because sometimes, like this mom, she's like, well, it depends on how hard I want to score my 20-month-old son. You don't sit down and do a screener like that. You try your damnedest to take your emotion and kind of tuck it deep inside your heart someplace and say, okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to think about this. And this is why I want to walk through these questions with you so you all can be well aware and thoughtful when you answer these questions. But the part 2, the follow-up, should be done right then and there if you score at a medium risk or a high risk. If you miss, quote unquote, or your score is 3 or above, then your pediatrician needs to follow up. It's important. And if he or she can't do it right then and there, then schedule an ASAP or see if the nurse practitioner can help or something. But that's how it's designed to be implemented, to rescore it. And if you then get a 2, you monitoring or what they call surveillance, right? And if you score 3 or above, 7, 10, 12 plus, then you need a referral. I want you all now, as you're sitting there, ask yourself, where do you all fall with your pediatrician? Did they administer this screening, this MCHAT at 18 and then again at 24 months? And they can do it again anytime. Some tests we shouldn't teach to the test, but this is developed where you can take it every month if you need to. I mean, it's not designed to do that, but if you answer it at 18 months and 24 months and 30 months, that's totally fine. You're going to answer the same questions. And so for me, reading through them with you right now doesn't invalidate the outcomes or break any rules. You will know the questions each time it's administered through the office. The whole idea behind this screener is to conduct further inquiry and then get a referral to a specialist as needed. Pediatricians are not necessarily developmental specialists. And I know you're all maybe sitting there scratching your head saying, yeah, but he's a pediatrician or she's a pediatrician. There are 4 categories under pediatrics. 1, they could specialize newborns, right? They only see newborns, or they could be newborn intensive care at the NICU. Those pediatricians, I had a friend and a colleague back in Vermont, and that's what she specialized in, just the NICU. And then there are mostly general pediatrics, right? So they have to study the medicine, right? The physical biology of the body from birth all the way to 18 or 21, actually. And then the 4th subgroup is called the developmental behavior specialist. And they have additional training in the developmental milestones and how they all relate to one another. But here's the kicker. There's a serious shortage of developmental behavior specialists here in the United States, and there has been for a number of years. So according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, there are only 758 board-certified developmental behavioral pediatricians in the United States as of 2022. And yet, we have 19 million children with a developmental or learning problem, learning disorder. And that runs a whole gamut. Autism is part of that, but there's all other kinds of developmental and learning disabilities. So we only have 758 developmental pediatricians who have specialized in that area, and yet 19 million kids are struggling. So what do we do, right? And where do we go? Who do we talk to? That's why I'm here trying to give you guys tools, information, strategies, knowledge, so you can be your child's best advocate. And what research suggests is that over the next 10 years, 1/3 of the existing developmental behavioral pediatricians are expected to retire. And we have significantly fewer replacements. In other words, the medical students are not necessarily going into pediatrics, nor are they getting a specialization in the developmental areas. So they're scrambling to try to figure out, as these doctors retire and leave, how the heck are we going to take care of these kids? And the numbers are escalating. We have 19 million today. What's it going to be 10 years from now? And part of my impression, this is just my opinion, is that the reason why doctors aren't going into this area, because it's really freaking hard. The healthcare system in general, again, in my opinion, is pretty dysfunctional. And then you're looking at these poor children with, 54% of children in America have a chronic disease. That's 1 out of 2. And so I've heard in recent years that not only do general physicians feel like they've become, quote unquote, legal drug pushers, because let's be honest, there's a lot of incentivized action going on to write those prescriptions. That's reality. I'm here to be honest with you all. You can look that up. But it also seems that the role of the pediatrician over at least my career span, the last 30, 35 years, has become to act like a funnel. And what that means is that they can look at some basic wellness. Do they have a cold? Is there an ear infection? Does he need stitches? Did he break his arm? Beyond the basic medicine, they refer out to specialists, including a developmental specialist. So your pediatrician technically can't diagnose autism or speech and language disability or an occupational weakness or any of those developmental areas. And the 4 primary developmental, think of them as pillars, would be social emotional. So they would refer out to a child psychologist. Language and communication, they would refer out to a speech language pathologist. Cognition, which also would be either myself or a clinical psychologist who specializes in intellectual diversity. And then movement or physical areas, and that would be a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. And so your pediatrician doesn't have the expertise to really understand those areas. So my point here, mom and dad and grandma, all of you together, because there's power in numbers, right? You are your baby's number one advocate. And my role here is to empower you, to give you more knowledge, and to even spark some questions so you can scratch your head and say, wait a second, what else can I do? Because you guys direct the conversation. You make the inquiries and monitor his health and well-being, right? But I know that you guys have been shortchanged with understanding what the importance of this screener at your well baby checkups, and whether your pediatrician is really following through with what their role should be. Because at the end of the day, I believe it's necessary for each and every one of us to really embrace our independence and take our own health, growth, well-being, development, all of that in our own hands. Even for us adults in the room here, just because we've physically stopped growing, right? We're not going to get any taller. We stop in our teens or we stop in our 20s. We as human beings will never lose the potential to expand or enhance or reshape any of our abilities through our mind or our brain, our bodies, our spirits. So let me walk through these 20 questions and give you some quick highlights because I really do want you to understand what they're intended for. So number one, if you point to something across the room, does your child look at it? For example, if you point to a toy or an animal, does your child look at that toy or animal? And that measures joint attention and is really, really important because joint attention starts to emerge, and I use that word a lot here, but it starts to emerge around 6 months of age. So by the time your child is 16 months, 18 months, 20 months, that should be pretty well established. Joint attention is really, really important. And you're going to see out of these 20 questions, 10 of them is about joint attention. That's interesting, right? All right, so number 2, have you ever wondered if your child might be deaf? And that too is about awareness, but it's also about auditory processing. And is your child coding language in that first year, year and a half, well enough that they're responding to your voice in all of this noise? Right? Number 3, does your child play pretend and make believe? For example, does he pretend to drink from an empty cup, pretend to talk on a phone, or pretend to feed a doll or a stuffed animal? And pretend play typically in kind of a natural growth pattern starts to emerge around 18 months of age. And so it doesn't mean that if you said no to that, then that would be this big, huge red flag. What it does mean is, are they beginning to do it? And so by the time they hit that 24th month, they're pretty well into pretend play. And so at 18 months of age, you should be seeing it beginning to emerge simply, right? Like pretending to eat or drink or to talk on the phone. Number 4, does your child like climbing on things? For example, furniture, playground equipment, or stairs. Again, this is looking at neurological health and growth and development, looking at bilateral integration, especially walking up the stairs or on an uneven surface. Then they're able to adjust their upper motor neurons, their lower motor neurons, their right and left hemisphere, looking at balance and coordination. Again, he doesn't have to be a perfect climber or walker, but that gait and body awareness really starts to solidify around 14 months of age. Does your child make unusual finger movements near his or her eyes? And for example, do they wiggle their fingers close to their eyes? And that's what we would call a visual self-stimulation. It is for the most part pretty atypical. Every once in a while, you're going to see a kid jump up and down and shake his hands and do those kinds of things. But putting the fingers and wiggling them in front of their own eyes is a way of self-soothing, and that's what self-stimming is. And you and I, or any human, will do some self-stimming or self-soothing, like shaking your legs when you're trying to concentrate, or clicking your pen, or smacking your gum, or twirling your hair. All of those kinds of things are appropriate occasional behaviors, but the wiggling of the fingertips in front of the eyes is fairly atypical. Number 6, does your child point with one finger to ask for something or to get help? For example, pointing to a snack or a toy that's out of their reach. This is really looking at the gestures, and that's a very mature thing to do by pointing. Mature meaning that it should be emerging around 12 months and 14 months. And by 16 months, it should be used frequently, right? And gestures, and I've shared in previous episodes about 16 gestures by 16 months, and I will have a link below. But pointing is very, very important because it's part of that joint attention. It's part of a gestural cue that really, really means, join me in this. This is important. So does your child point with one finger to show you something interesting? So there's a slight difference between asking for something, like pointing up on the cupboard and says, I want my teddy, or getting help, like pointing to the boot, like the boot is stuck in the drawer or something. But also then pointing with one finger to show you something of interest. And that goes back to that joint engagement and shared experience. The next one is, is your child interested in other children? And this we have to be sensitive about. For example, does your child watch other children, smile at them, and go up to them? But those are the examples. We're not expecting an 18-month-old or even a 24-month-old to share and play with other children. They can for spurts here and there, but for the most part, they're showing interest of their peer group, right? But it's not really sharing yet because they don't have that sophistication, that social communication yet. But they're interested, and so they will often go up to somebody, like if the cousin is going to come and play, but they don't really know how to sustain that conversational flow or engagement or play. They don't have really strong, reliable turn-taking skills yet. But we want them to become aware, to look at them, and with interest, watch them, right? And so there's a subtle difference. And so the whole sharing and playing together doesn't really start until 2.5 or closer to the 3rd birthday. And that is a myth out there. And I think it's really, really important. A lot of parents will say, especially during the whole lockdown thing, is that, oh, they didn't have any socialization. And the truth is, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old really doesn't need a lot of socialization. I think they need exposure, like if you went to a playground and there are kids running all around, they will follow older kids and want to engage with them. They can't because they don't have that social skills yet. But an older kid is almost an adult to them. If you have a 2.5-year-old compared to an 8-year-old, that's a significant difference there. But it's important that your 18-month-old and your 2-year-old is aware of those other kids, and they look at them almost wantingly, but they don't have that sophistication yet. So the next question, does your child show you things by bringing them to you and holding them up for you to see? Not to get help, but just to share. For example, showing you a flower or a stuffed animal or a toy truck. And kids will often do this, and maybe you notice this during the holidays, because if you have aunts and uncles and cousins coming and going, and they would just bring things to show you. Again, they didn't really know how to talk about it too much. Now, some kids are chatty Cathys at 2 and 2.5, but this is their nonverbal way of starting a conversation. And it's a very important precursor to conversational flow and to turn taking, to asking questions. Oh, how are you? Oh, look what, I did, and really engaging with that object and the other person. But it's a very important precursor. Number 10, does your child respond when you call his or her name? And this is a big one. So does he or she look up or talk or say, huh? Or start to babble, right? Or do they stop what they're doing and they'll at least look toward whoever is calling their name? And that's the important part here, is that they're developing a maturation of themselves and others, but they're also processing and filtering the auditory noise in whatever room you're at and able to pull out something that's important, such as their name, right? And they're doing it in real time. In a future episode, I'll talk at length about what is auditory processing. And that's a little bit different than just this catch-all phrase of language processing. But auditory is just the perception and the interpretation of the spoken word. One of the most important things in that first year, 18 months, is that your baby learns his or her name and that's their identity. And so for them to be attuned to that and to be able to perceive it in everyday activity is critical. When you smile at your child, does he or she smile back at you? Again, this is part of that social connection, right? And that's a nonverbal gesture saying, "Hi, I see you. I acknowledge you." Or sometimes I wink and other kids will try to wink, right? Number 12, does your child get upset by everyday noises? And this is an auditory sensitivity. I hear a lot of parents nowadays talk about, my child is sensitive, right? And I think we need to respect different gradations of sensitivity, but it's not healthy to be overly sensitive with this three-dimensional world. We have to really gauge what's happening neurologically and developmentally to make this happen. So that is an auditory sensitivity, like to a loud vacuum cleaner or loud music, right? And if that happens once in a while, if he's sick or if he's tired or if he's had a long day, that's all understandable. But if something is chronic, does your child walk? And that physical development, again, a lot of pediatricians, a lot of parents, a lot of school teachers will push that developmental marker out further and further. And by 18 months, they should be walking. I mean, the outside of development, motorically, that would be 16 months. If your child isn't really walking independently by 16 months, you should pick up the phone and call a PT or an OT. Yes, first you can talk to your pediatrician, but they might say, wait and see. I say every month counts. So number 14, does your child look you in the eye when you are taking care of him or her, like playing with them or dressing them? And again, that falls under this pillar of connection, attunement, purpose, sustained attention. And it's not a fleeting look or just a look and a smile, but you want them to really feel, or you want to feel connected with them. And we have to put a little asterisk on this one because, like that example that I read, the email from the mom, she said he has good eye contact. And I have met hundreds and hundreds of children who did end up being on the autism spectrum, and many of them will learn appropriate eye contact. I mean, they are well loved. They are well taken care of. They do build a loving relationship with their mother most of the time, or with their primary caretaker. And they learn that by connecting with the eyes, that makes them feel good and it gets them stuff, right? So there's a positive reinforcement there. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I know that's often a parent's first response. Well, they have great eye contact. They give me lots of hugs. Yeah, because that's only one possible symptom. All right, number 15, does your child try to copy what you do? For example, wave bye-bye, clap, or make a funny noise when you do it. So this supports gestures, like I talked about 16 gestures by 16 months, but also imitation. And gestures and imitation have to be pretty solid before your child is ready to speak and use words with purpose and intention. They have to understand that gestures represent communication, just like words represent your thoughts and your feelings and your desires, communication, right? And so it's part of this developmental hierarchy that's really important. So if the next one, 16, if you turn your head to look at something, does your child look around to see what you're looking at? So say you're playing a game or you're changing him and you turn and look. Is he aware, connected, in tune with you? But he also, is very sponge-like, right? He wants to know what you're doing or thinking and wants to be in it with you. So that is part of that engagement that's pretty important. And number 18, does your child understand when you tell him or her to do something? Again, some basic following directions that can be a hit or miss. But here's the key. If you don't give them any gestural cues, if you don't point, if you don't look toward whatever you're asking, if you just put your hands on your lap and ask, put the book on the chair, or bring me the blanket, they can start to process these types of questions. Also give them directives, like where does your cup go? In the sink, right? Where's the doggy's food? In the cupboard. Those kinds of questions. Number 19, if something new happens, does your child look at your face to see how you feel about it? For example, if he or she hears a strange or a funny noise, or if they see a new toy, something novel, right? Will they look at you to see how to respond? That's part of that human connection, that attention and awareness. It's also seeking confirmation, like, is this good? Should I be scared? Should I be happy? Should I go and touch this new thing? Right? But it's a nonverbal visual connection about you in the environment. And that's a really important skill to have, to tell us that they're consciously aware of what's going on and they're connected with you to understand, to get feedback, right? And then the last question, does your child like movement activities? And again, this can be one of those asterisk ones, right? Because it's looking at your child's vestibular system, movement and connection. Lots of kids like to move a lot. Lots of kids can overseek movement, right? They spin around, they jump, they roll, all those kinds of things, because that's a way to regulate themselves. And sometimes kids are not very physical or active. If you don't feel like your son or daughter fits the parameters that we're looking for, then your pediatrician should probe and dive deeper into those questions and figure that out. I shared in the very beginning that the scoring from 0 to 2, like if you have 1 or 2 of these, you're at low risk. Let's monitor that. Maybe with a conversation with your pediatrician, then you take a look and say, oh, I'm going to really look at his sensitivity to loud noises. A lot of kids don't like vacuum cleaners, and maybe it's just because they haven't heard it on a regular basis, right? Or it's a certain pitch or frequency that really drives them crazy. That wouldn't be a big problem, but I would encourage all of you to then assess, what does he do with auditory stimulation in other contexts, right? You bring it to the next level. This is information that is really powerful. And so I wanted to kind of walk through this because I have seen a lot of dialogue online, and parents are getting some, I think, bad information, bad direction from their pediatrician. And I want you all to feel much more empowered, knowledgeable, capable. And I have often heard parents say, I didn't want to go there because it scares the pants off of me. This is serious stuff. I get that. But at the same time, in this day and age, with the way that our systems are kind of bogged down, right? Our pediatric offices are overscheduled. If you do need to go and get a second opinion or to get an evaluation, there's going to be a wait list, 3 months, 6 months, some places a whole year. And so use what you have at your disposal. Try to get as much as you can from your pediatrician. And if you still don't, then call friends and family. But I want you to ask yourself these questions. Did your pediatrician administer the MChat? Did they follow up, right? Did he or she explain what the results were? Did you, and this is a big one and a hard one, did you answer questions honestly and with an open heart? Because it's hard. But now that I've kind of walked you through each question, and down below, I will have the link where you can go online. I did a dummy, an untrue case, right? And I got results, but I will give you the links and you can look at them. And I want you guys to be the evaluators, right? You determine, where is my son or daughter for real? Can you discuss your concerns or your questions with your pediatrician? Do you think a second opinion is warranted? Can you call friends and family to get a referral to another pediatrician? And then as a wrap up, I just want to give you other options. And this is important too, because like I said, pediatricians are medical doctors who kind of focus on the younger population. They don't necessarily, they're just medical doctors. They don't necessarily understand the subtle nuances of these developmental pillars that we talk about, right? Have you ever considered or have you looked up a DO, a doctor of osteopathic medicine? They have the same education as a medical doctor, an MD, right? MDs generally focus on treating specific conditions, and they usually use medication. And if it's beyond their scope, then the pediatrician, like I said, will refer out to a specialist. On the other hand, DOs, doctors of osteopathic medicine, tend to focus on the whole body healing, with or without some traditional medication. So they can write scripts and all of that too, but they look at the system working together. What they say is that it began as a small profession with distinctive philosophy, which now has grown to become a critical component of the nation's healthcare system. And in 2023, the total number of osteopathic physicians in the U.S. reached almost 150,000. Like, remember, I told you that there were just over 700 developmental pediatricians. And so here's 150,000. And so that means a 30% increase over the past 5 years. So DOs can treat the whole family too. And they will often welcome the opportunity to really see a child throughout his whole childhood. The other option would be a functional medicine. And functional medicine practitioners really studies the systems of our biological body that focuses on identifying and addressing the root cause of a disease or an illness or a problem. So each symptoms or differential diagnosis may be one of many little pieces to the puzzle. And in the United States, the use of functional medicine has grown significantly in recent years as well. So I think it's interesting that we, as the adults, are exploring different options. So according to the survey conducted by the Functional Medicine Practitioner Research Network, the number of functional medicine practitioners in the U.S. has increased from just over 5,000 in 2010 to nearly 40,000 in 2020. So that's a big jump and another great option for you guys to explore. And I've shared this before, you don't have to, just because you have children, see a pediatrician. You can find a healthcare practitioner that really serves you and your family and your desire of creating a healthy home life and wellness and thriving children. There are choices. It's not always easy. I get that. And we do have to do the legwork. And we have to be uncomfortable sometimes saying, I'm sorry, I can't work with you. I don't feel comfortable. It's okay. Sometimes it's just a personality thing, right? I remember letting my dentist go once, and he wrote me a letter like he was really personally insulted. And I thought maybe that's why we couldn't really get along. But be honest with yourself. Hoping something will resolve or just go away is pretty risky business, especially when we're talking about an 18-month or a 24-month or a 3-year-old, right? If you're unsure, do some more legwork, do some more research. I will recommend a book by Patricia Lemmer, Lemer, called Outsmarting Autism. My goal here for this episode is really empowering you of what is the MCHAT, what are pediatricians encouraged to do, and can you encourage them to do the right thing with you and help you filter through all of this. So I do have links below to get an expanded version of the developmental milestones for 18 to 24-month-old, because if you just Google it, developmental milestones, the CDC pops up or your state organization, and they're very, very cursory, right? A couple little check marks under each domain. Mine are pretty extensive. I look at all of them across the board. I look at speech and language and communication, articulation, of course, but I look at the social, emotional, and cognition because they all develop together synergistically. And then I look at the physical aspect too. Not to say that I would, quote unquote, ever treat that, but then that's when I would refer out. And quite often I would say, we can't address these early speech and language issues or communication or even attention issues if they have other physical problems that are interfering or blocking him or her from learning social communication or spoken language, or even sitting in the high chair and learning how to explore with food and all of that. And so sometimes we have to put things, speech and language, and that on the back burner because perhaps there is a sensory integration deficit or weakness that's interfering and really causing problems with him being able to engage with his daily life. And so that's a different episode too. But I think it's really important. The more information you all have at the tips of your fingers, then the better questions you can ask, the more referrals you can seek out, and the better you guys can do at home, right? So if you know that 10 of these 20 questions fall under the umbrella of looking at joint attention, then you're going to want to go back to playing a lot of social games and playing a lot of nursery rhymes and getting them to engage through play and gestures and hold off on speech and language. I hope this all makes sense to you. And please feel free to reach out. You can email me or DM me, email contact at higherlearning.com. Higher, my last name, Hyer. I would love to help in any way I can. So take care. Thanks for spending time with me. Thanks for investing in your child's future and showing the possibilities. So God bless. See you next week. Bye.